What's going on, everybody? Welcome to this week's Lumix Live. A little bit of a fun conversation. We're going to be a little more technical like we've been for the last couple of weeks, talking about really just diving into the firmware updates that were published. There were a lot of them. A lot of various different cameras getting updates, a lot of cool stuff with the collaborations between DJI and LuMix, as well as some really cool feature updates for the S5II series. So I've got everything that I need here to set all of this stuff up and show you and walk you through the menu selections on what you need to change in the menus to get all this stuff to work like perfect the way it was designed to work. So we're going to be going through all of that. I've got some demonstrations also from the S5II and the S5IIX new firmware, the handheld high resolution shot mode that we're going to walk through. I've got Lightroom all set up so we can take a look at some of those images as well. And as we've said across the board with all of these, if you have questions that you want to have me answer, tag at Lumix USA, as you can see many of the people in the chat doing, and we'll try to get through as many of those questions as we can today. But yeah, before we dive into that, I want to remind everybody about Lumix Pro services. Here in the United States, we have the Red and the Platinum tier available. Red is free if you've just purchased the new Lumix camera or you have a Lumix camera purchased recently. Follow the QR code or the link down in the description to get yourself registered for the free tier of Lumix Pro services. That is how you get your extended 3-year warranty with all new purchases. So you get yourself covered under manufacturer in case anything defective happens to the camera. But then if you're someone who prefers to have maybe a little bit higher level service, you want something that's maybe a little better peace of mind for you, take a look at the Platinum level service that we offer. Platinum level is an upgraded service. It is a paid-for service available from us, and that gets you the 3-year extended warranty, just like the Red tier does. But on top of it, you're going to get 2-day repairs with next-day shipping both ways. You're going to get 20% off out of warranty repairs. So if something is dropped, broken, out of warranty, if it's just an older product that's out of a warranty status, you get a discount on the repairs there. You also get annual sensor and EVF cleanings, lens calibration and firmware updates if it's things that you want to have us do instead of maybe, sensor cleanings and stuff that you may want to do yourself. But even for those that would prefer to speak to someone instead of using an online service for chatting in with service teams, you do also get an exclusive hotline that's open 9 to 5, Monday through Friday, here in the United States on the East Coast time. So you do have access to that as well. So if that is something that you're interested in, I encourage you to take a look at the links in the description or check out the QR code that was on the screen. I will run that again at the end of the stream so that you've all got access to that. If you're looking for Lumix Pro services, if it's available in your region, we do also have a global portal link down in the bottom there to see what's available maybe in your neck of the woods. So yeah. Let us see here. A couple questions that have come in before we dive right into the demonstrations. Chris, with the new widless new update, work with adapted lenses. We're going to talk about that in a little bit. Do you have to have the gimbal? We're going to talk about that in a few minutes as well. Is there a roadmap for newer updated Lumix Micro Four Thirds lenses? At this point, there is no published roadmap that I am aware of for Micro Four Thirds lenses, cameras, things like that. We do have a roadmap for the L-mount system, so the S series that has a couple of new lenses on there. Again, we don't really have details that I can share with you about what those lenses are, other than kind of lines on a chart. But as we get closer to when those are ready to come out, obviously we will be talking about them here, and you'll all hear about them in social media and all that fun stuff. So yeah, that's kind of where that is right now. Let's see here. DJ says, Merry firmware mess. May I suggest a handheld high res mode that samples only half of the shots and grants only twice the resolution, a nice halfway solution for quick shots? Yeah, I mean, it's definitely something that we can ask the engineering team about. The way our handheld high resolution and our high resolution shot has always worked is that it is the full resolution that you're going to get from the camera. There is an option, and I'll show it to you in the menus, where you can shoot a reduced resolution, but it doesn't change the processing for how that image is captured. It's still either 8 or 16 shots, but you get a lower resolution file if you don't want to be dealing with the full 96 megapixel or 100 megapixel in Micro Four Thirds, or 80 if you're looking at the original G9. So yeah, we'll go through that kind of stuff. G100 on that list. Unfortunately, the G100 doesn't have any firmware updates at this time. So, is there a chance to have an update that makes the exposure meter work in manual exposure mode while using auto ISO? GH6 latest firmware. I guess I'm a little confused by what you mean that the meter does work. Adding auto into anything in manual is going to try to balance the camera to 0 exposure. So at that point, an exposure meter is going to show you 0. So if you could expand on what it is that you're wanting to see the meter do, let me know in the chat. It helps me get an easier idea of what, we kind of want to look at. Easier for me to pass that into the engineering team to kind of figure out, hey, this is what everyone's asking for, how something should operate. It gets taken under advisement, gets compared to other requests that we're getting, and then we look at a collective of what everybody is saying and they want, and kind of finding out what is the best fit for everybody. And yeah, that's kind of how that kind of stuff works. So, with that, let's actually talk about firmware, right? So, here at Lumix, we've always taken a very strong stance on firmware updates. Primarily, you see in the higher end models, so, G9, GH5, GH6, GH5 Mark II, S series. Those cameras typically are the ones that are getting, feature upgrades, that they're getting heavier firmware support on average. Mainly because those are the models that are built to be able to, kind of think a little bit more forward, that, hey, if there are things that we are thinking about wanting to do, what cameras have the headroom to do it, right? More entry-level models like the G100, like, the point-and-shoot series, a lot of times those cameras are harder to make major feature upgrades with, because they are built specifically for, the kind of market that they're designed for. Things like a G100, I'm going to pick on the G100 a little bit for this one, not in a bad way, but if, say you want to see us add things like 10-bit or, faster frame rates, if they're possible, things like that, smaller cameras like a G100 or even into the point-and-shoot series, those become much harder to do because those chassis are never designed for that stuff in the first place. So you would run into major thermal problems, you could run into image quality problems. You potentially also run into challenges because a lot of the time, lower end models are running lower powered or lower spec processors than what we use in the much higher end models, because those higher end models are designed to be more demanding and feature spec wise. So because of that, we still try to push as much as we can across the line that we have, and as far back as we can in the line. That clearly kind of, I think maybe gets interpreted by some as, maybe we're leaving cameras behind with firmware updates, but the reality is that the hardware can't do most of the stuff that we're doing now, or things that have now become more expected. So we will always try to push things back as far as we can, and I think the updates that we just released, primarily for the Micro Four Thirds side, with the GH6 and the GH5 Mark II, are kind of a point in this to really kind of show you what can be done with modern firmware and what the newer processors are capable of versus what older generation processors had the flexibility to do, especially with things like the LiDAR direct assist focusing, which are things that at the time when those cameras were developed was not a thing that was even being thought of. So a lot of this stuff gets kind of reverse engineered into the logic of, well, we have the processing power on these models we don't, so we can't develop it for that. So what am I talking about with the DJI setup here? So We're just going to take a look here at the page. I think it's the easiest way to kind of, explain and show what this whole update is. So there has been a partnership between Lumix and DJI for a little bit of time at this point. Actually, for quite some time at this point. And the whole purpose of this collaboration is to better integrate tools that you use in support of the cameras that you're working with. DJI is one of the major players in the industry and now actually part of the LMAT Alliance, gives us some unique opportunities, especially with the breadth of their products like the RS3 Pro, the RSC2, which is a gimbal that I personally own and use, and then now even with some of the cooler technologies like the LiDAR Rangefinder accessory that they've released in their series. So this whole partnership is built based on wanting to provide you, photographers and videographers, more tools that are directly integrated. So trying to cut down on how much extra stuff you have to throw in to be able to utilize them. So among them is the LiDAR autofocusing assistance. Now, this is something that is a bit of a double-edged sword if it's something you've never worked with or even kind of looked into. I'm going to preface this entire session about LiDAR autofocusing to say that it is not a silver bullet. It is not something that is just going to magically make focus perfect and better. It has its own challenges compared to PDAF on our full-frame series, now on the G9 Mark II. It even has its own problems against DFD focusing systems. But we're going to talk about that. I've got the system. I'll show you how to set it up and go through it. But ultimately, what this collaboration did is it took technology that DJI has developed, in this case, the LiDAR autofocusing rangefinder, and it has, instead of needing to use an external focus controller, so an external motor, that would have to then be mounted onto a rail that then has to be attached to the lens that you want to use, whether it's a native lens or a cinema lens or things like that. Those are things that we want to try to minimize as much as you can to make it a more direct integration. So with this system, the LiDAR rangefinder is sending distance information in through the gimbal to the camera to utilize the camera's and native lenses focus motors. So no other external accessories are needed. You don't need an external focus motor. You don't need to rig this thing up and then calibrate the distances that the lens can work at. This is a very tight integration through this whole system. Now, with it, obviously, like I said, that means that there are some limitations that you kind of have to be aware of, is that not every camera has the hardware required to be able to make this communication work. Not every camera has the horsepower that it requires. So when it comes to things like the LiDAR assist with the RS3 Pro, the GH6 and the GH5 Mark II were cameras that have just recently gotten a firmware update to add this support. These are two of the newer Micro Four Thirds cameras that are using the latest generation or the later generation processors that we use. So they have the horsepower to do it. That's why if you look, cameras like the G9, the GH5S, S1, S1R, the original S1 cameras, even the original S5, currently do not have the support for this. Does it mean that they are never going to get to the support of this? Honestly, I can't answer that, but as of right now, this is where it is set. This is what has been worked on between DJI and Lumix to make sure that the compatibility is there and that all of the requirement boxes are ticked. So you'll notice that there is also another really cool thing added in with this, which is Activetrack. And I've talked about Activetrack a number of times before on these streams. Activetrack is one of those things that if you've been in the DJI gimbal and range, their accessory world for a while, you know what this is already. But for those that don't know, Activetrack is a system that allows you to have the gimbal take over some of the following for you. And in some cases, it can actually take over all of the following for you, depending on what your level of discerning is, I would say. Letting software or a computer take over everything from the creative process, I think, is a bit of a stretch still. But there are a lot of cases where I've used it and it's been an incredibly invaluable tool, especially when you're, a single person operation in the field. But what's cool is that you'll see the Activetrack side of the solution is something that goes all the way back to the original G9, although you have to use a special cable for that, and even works with all of the box cameras and all of the current S-Series cameras. So I will be demonstrating both of these in a moment. But first off, the LiDAR functionality. If you are going to want to be doing this on your GH6 or a GH5 Mark II, you are going to want to go to our firmware download page, which I will drop in the chat right now. You will want to go to this page and make sure that your GH6 is updated to version 2.4 and that your GH5 Mark II is updated to 1.3. These are the firmware updates that have added this functionality and will be required to make sure that all the communication happens between these devices. So make sure you get those downloaded, get them installed, and then you can go from there. But to actually show you how this whole system works, I have an RS3 Pro here with a GH6 attached to it. I have the LiDAR Rangefinder up here. I know spatial awareness. So I have the LiDAR finder up here, and it's actually quite a pretty straightforward way to set this thing up. I'm going to attempt to do this in a way that actually is easy enough for y'all to see. So pardon the weird angles that I have to move myself at. So as you can see, we've got the camera set up here. The LiDAR finder is going to sit up into the pentaprism, or up into the hot shoe of the camera. You're going to get one cable that comes off of that. On an RS3 Pro, that's going to plug into the bottom of the connection ports here. And then your camera is going to plug into the RSS port right on the gimbal itself. And then you're just going to plug that right into the USB port on the camera. So very straightforward. It's two cables mounted right on the system. That's all you need to do. What the system will do from here is once you power the gimbal on, the camera is going to be communicating in through the gimbal. So that is why you have to have it connected, and that is why you need the gimbal for this, actually. Once you've got it all set up and you're plugged in, this is where on the camera itself, you have to make sure that you are selecting tether on the USB control for this, so that the gimbal has the control information needed. Now, if you've been working with these gimbals before, this part's not necessarily new. The cameras have been able to connect in with the gimbals to give you things like iris control, shutter speed control, ISO control through using the dials on the gimbal. And you still have those functionalities. But the way this is working now is once you have everything kind of set up, what you'll notice is that up here on the LiDAR finder, the light has turned green now that everything's kind of all plugged in and ready to go. This is telling you now that the LiDAR system is communicating directly to the camera. It's connecting directly in with the lens. As I'm pointing to something that you can't see, it's connecting right into this whole system so that now the autofocus distance information is being controlled by this unit instead of using the in-body system, and it's driving and telling the focus motors where they need to go. So, as I said, this is a really cool solution if you want to be working on the go and you want to utilize something that is right perfect in this setup. The trade-off thing here for this is that if you want to use the LiDAR assist for the GH6 or GH5 Mark II, you have to have the RS3 Pro gimbal. This LiDAR unit has to communicate to the gimbal, and the gimbal is doing the translation information to send it to the camera. What that means is that I can't take the LiDAR system and just plug it right into the camera. I have to use the gimbal as part of the communication. Now, I know some people may be a little annoyed at that, but that is what the technology is designed for. That is how this has been built to work. Will things change in the future? Who knows? Personally, if things were to change, I would imagine that it would mean that it would need a different LiDAR finder, because if you think about the way technology works like this, the LiDAR finder is a relatively quote-unquote simple device. It's sending information to the gimbal is sending information back to it, it's reading distance, it has the ability for a video feed because on the gimbal you get a video feed from it. So that is where your information for distance is coming from. It needs that layer of communication there. If you try plugging this right into the camera, it's not going to do anything because camera doesn't know about it. Camera doesn't have in-out communication over the USB. So what you end up getting with this is you get very snappy autofocus from point to point. You get really good tracking for subjects moving through the frame, and it gives you a different level of reliability is what I'll say. So coming from a GH6, this could be a really nice solution for you if you want to have something that is very fast, it's very snappy, it is completely independent of any frame rate, of any changes there. It works with all the native lenses that we've got in the LuMix system for Micro Four Thirds. I have tested this with adapted lenses. It does not work with adapted lenses. You are adding another layer of communication there. So that would be my understanding as to why that doesn't work. But honestly, at that point, anything at the adapter and forward is going to be up to those manufacturers to either be part of the alliance in L-mount and have communication being standardized, or honestly, it's probably not something that's going to happen. However, you do still have that function to be able to say, well, I will attach the rail and I'll put the focus motor on it and do it that way. Doesn't necessarily change the way all the stuff works, but you know, it's just a little bit of a different method there. So, a couple things to know about the way this system works. For one, LiDAR assisted autofocus, and I'm going to move this off camera just because it's awkward. The LiDAR assist autofocusing for this particular setup is a very good tool to add. It has its drawbacks, though. So for one, there is no face and eye detect autofocusing. Systems like our phase hybrid autofocusing, like our DFD, where you are actually looking at the true image feed from the camera to determine the subject that you're going to be focusing on, which would be face, eye, head, body, animal. If you're in the G9 Mark II, animal eye detection. Those are things that are done on board and done through the visual side of a focusing system. What that means is that a LiDAR system like this unit here will not be able to be as accurate for things like critical eye focus compared to something like on our S5 Mark II, Mark IIX, or G9 Mark II with the PDAF and our detection systems there. And that's because this unit itself is detached from the series. If you come from the old school DSLR days, think of it as the fact that old PDAF systems were detached from the sensor plane. So you had a split prism that would direct light down, and that's how you got your distance information. The other challenge with a finder like this is distance that they work. The LiDAR finder from DJI, this one, which is the Pro one, designed for the RS3 Pro, is designed to be working to around 14 meters. Now, there's some variance there, whether or not you're inside or outside, what the maximum range is in ideal scenarios, but these are things to be aware of. It will work great in the environments that it's designed for, but if you're someone who's going to be working really fast-paced and you need hypercritical focus on the eyes, shoot at a deeper depth of field than you would normally think of, because you have to account for the fact that this is not looking at eye detect and targeting with the LiDAR piece the eye. It's targeting a region to focus on. But where does this excel compared to even on the newer cameras like the S5 Mark II, Mark IIX, and the G9 Mark II. LiDAR assist autofocusing, specifically in this tool, is actually very useful in much lower light scenarios or situations where your subject has lower contrast. So think situations like if you're an automotive photographer, or primarily if you're an automotive videographer. To be honest, photographers I don't think are going to be using this often. If you are an automotive videographer, having something like this where it can shoot the beam, detect the distance, and get you that distance, especially in lower light scenarios, is going to be very much in the wheelhouse of a product like this. Your focus range doesn't have to be so hypercritical that it is the eyes, nose, or ears is the difference between your depth of field. And it's going to get there really fast. The other kind of area where this actually really kind of works, like I said, is in much lower contrast situations. So if you are, say, filming a psych wall and the subject that you're photographing is very, kind of blending into the background, if that's the aesthetic that you're going for, things like that, which would mean that it's a relatively low-key visual situation, LiDAR can have an advantage there over even the best of the PDAF systems out there. So understand that while this is an incredibly cool tool, especially if you're a GH6 user and you've wanted to be able to fly this thing, work with it out in the field, and be able to get a very snappy autofocus, this can be an awesome accessory for you. As I said, you do have to use the RS3 Pro with this. It is an integral part of the communication. However, I will also say that the RS3 Pro is a pretty sweet gimbal to begin with, as someone coming from an RSC2. So, yeah, it's a really fun, awesome accessory for it. Setup, like I said, super easy. You literally plug the thing in to the proper ports. As far as the camera goes, as I mentioned, you want to make sure that you follow the instructions. If you do have one of these setups and you're trying to get it to work, you want to have it work, make sure that you follow the instructions here with how you need to set up the menus in the camera. So setting focus ring lock to on, stuff like that. Just make sure you set up and follow these and it'll work. If for some reason when you go to power the gimbal on, if the camera does not prompt you to go to tether, which can happen depending on the startup sequence that you do. If your camera's on already and you plug the gimbal in, USB port's already been programmed because it's also pulls power from the gimbal itself. Just quickly unplug the cable, plug it back in, and then you'll get the prompt on the camera. Or just turn the camera on after the gimbal and everything's been settled and turned on. But yeah, this is probably one of the cooler things that I've seen actually get directly integrated. And again, because it's not requiring an external focus motor. And if you do go down this route and you have external lenses or manual focus lenses or cinema lenses, the same tool can be used for all of your lenses now, especially if you're on Micro Four Thirds platform like GH5 Mark II or GH6. So that is the LiDAR system there. I don't have a thin enough HDMI cable to plug into this and have it run at the same time, so a little tough doing this. But there will be on this page that I'm going to drop in the chat, there will be formal demonstration videos that I've worked on to actually walk you through the setup, to walk you through going, from cold, just plug the camera in, to actually showing you what it looks like and how it works in the really low light. Let's jump, before I move forward, let's actually double check a couple more questions that I think came in here. Are there any plans to fix Godot's flash delay? I'm not seeing any delay in the flash. Joseph, I recommend making sure that your flash is up to date with Godot's software. I've done bracketing, I've done burst shooting, TTL, I've done non-TTL shooting with it, and it keeps up with the burst rates that are rated on the camera. Yeah, I would just double check the firmware. Godot's firmware, flash firmware update's not the easiest thing to do. It's a little kind of complicated, but definitely make sure that your flashes are up to date. What does this mean in the new firmware? Improve viewfinder visibility between continuous shooting frames. Yeah, so that particular note is down to most likely resolution and refresh on the viewfinder itself. Trying to minimize black frames, so the blackout in the framing. A lot of times stuff like that is really just making sure that it's a consistent experience in the viewfinder. So as we can update things, as we can maybe make the code a little more efficient, maybe even increase the image quality that you're seeing there, those are things that kind of get updated over time there. Peter, hoping you might be able to demonstrate LiDAR on the GH6 for us. Maybe at the end, if there's time, I can try to rig this thing up and show you. It's a little unwieldy with my setup because I don't really have a place to put it, but I will try at the end, Peter. Let's see here. Appreciate the links. Is the RS2 LiDAR included in any of this? No, unfortunately, the LiDAR design and the setup that has been collaborated between DJI and LUMIX is on the RS3 Pro and the accompanying LiDAR Rangefinder that is compatible for that one. The older systems, I believe, didn't have or don't have the same level of communication through the system. So that's kind of why you have a difference in what they can and can't do between each other. So, let's see here. I use constant preview to view changes to my exposure previous to taking an image, but if I'm overexposed per the camera meter, then it will darken the image while half pressing the shutter. Is there any way to fix this other than changing the meter mode? Use constant preview to view changes in your exposure prior to taking an image. But if you're overexposed, according to the camera's meter, it will darken the image while half pressing the shutter. I'm going to have to look into that one because I think I know what you're talking about as far as what you can see. It's possible that it's a metering mode thing, but it's also possible that it might be down to, are you going to use the, for constant preview, depending on the camera you're in, there are 3 different settings you can have: aperture priority, or aperture only, aperture and shutter only, and there's an option for which mode you want to be in. I have to look into that one for you, Noah. What about Sigma lenses and the LiDAR thing? So Sigma native L-mount lenses should work perfectly fine. I don't have any of my Sigma lenses here to test it. What I have tested is an adapter with an EF mount lens on it, so I have to be a little careful with this. So I have tested an adapter with an EF lens on it, and this combination does not work. But that's also the point that we don't guarantee compatibility. Sigma doesn't guarantee compatibility with anything other than their EF mount lenses for Sigma. In the GH6, I don't have a Metabones, but it's the same thing. Those are being, that stuff is being translated, I guess would be a good way to put it. The adapter is making their own translations of the focusing systems and the communication line. If those companies, since they're not like Metabones or Viltrox or any of those guys, they're not part of the alliances, whether it's Micro Four Thirds or Full Frame or the L-mount, they're basically doing the best they can because they're making it up. The MC21, because that is part of Sigma, as being part of the L-mount alliance, means that they have the focusing protocols. They know what they do to their lenses for EF. They know how they make them work. They know how to make the translation to the L-mount protocols. So yeah, there's that. Let's see here. One more question before I jump into the next one. What is a link to tested SD cards? That's I can send that to you. So the next, kind of update, it really was around the S5 Mark II and the S5 Mark IIX. So we're going to go back and look at this again. So we'll take a look. If you go to the same firmware download page, this is where you'll see the updates here for the full frame cameras. So you'll see that the S5 got a firmware update in October 17th. This was to add compatibility for the BG1 battery grip, the new battery grip that's chassis designed for the S5 Mark II chassis. It also adds an 8-way joystick instead of the 4-way that the previous one had. So minor update there. But the S5 Mark II and the Mark IIX got a major firmware update, which added a number of changes here for the way the camera works. Chief among those is the addition of handheld high-resolution shot mode and an extension for tripod variant of the high-resolution shot mode. It also added the ability to do 20 times magnification for manual focus and the tool called AF Point Scope. So, what do these things look like? It would help if I had the camera turned on, wouldn't it? So, I have my S5 Mark IIX hooked up here. So, first, let's talk about the little things before we jump into the high-resolution shot mode. So, to start with, if you are looking to want to do the 20 times magnification for manual focus, you're going to need to come into here to the custom menu. You're going to want to go to the AF page, which is so focus and shutter, page 1. You're going to want to then go to MF Assist. And then down on the bottom here is where you'll see max magnification in full. It's either 6 or 20. 6 lets you use a wider area of the center of the frame to be able to punch in and check your focus. 20 times is going to kind of limit a little bit of that, you know, selectable area that you can use for doing the 20 times magnification, keeping it closer to the center of the frame. So once that's up, the only other thing that you have to do is change MF Assist Display to full area, so full. And then this is now going to be set so that you can do 20 times magnification. So if I switch my camera to manual focus, and then I start, do I have manual focus over HDMI turned off? Where do I do that again? Shows you how often I use manual focus over HDMI. Enlarge live view display. Let's do mode 2. And did this set it up? There we go. Okay, so the way this system works, I should actually probably tell you what I just did. So I go into the in and out menu, go to HDMI rec output, and then enlarge live display. This is your punch in for manual focus while you over HDMI. You have the option in the menu to leave this off, which typically I do, because if I'm going to be having the camera feed out HDMI video feed, I don't want that punching in if I'm doing manual focus. In this case, you've got a couple of options here. You can have it enlarge while you're doing video recording. So that's while you're doing an actual recording on the camera. But your output from HDMI is limited to full HD 60 or less. And then mode 1 output matches whatever the resolution is. So if you punch in with this, it's going to be a lower resolution at that point. So for this demonstration, we're just going to do it this way. So right now, you'll see that I have a very tiny manual focus box. And you'll see the region that I have that I can move that box around, pick a point somewhere on here. And then when I start to manual focus, you see that it's going to punch in, and I have all the way down to 20 times magnification. As I move the rear dial out, I can zoom this out to 3 or go all the way back in to 20 times. So we've added the ability to go into 20 times. If I were to flip this back to what it is by default, before this firmware update came out, you'll see that you were at 6 times. So 6 times magnification, that's as far as we were able to get in. So you have more control and you have a much larger range that you can punch in for manual focus. So it makes things a little bit easier in some cases if you're using manual focus lenses. Remember that this does have to be set into the full area for it. And then as you can see here, this is the region difference between default, which is the 6 times magnification, versus if I come in here and change this back to 20, and then I go to move the point, you'll see that you are limited to a tighter region where the 20 times magnification system works. So, let's see here. A couple more questions came in. Oh yeah, link to the tested media cards. Let me do that before I forget everybody. Compatibilities. And there you go. That's the link to the compatibility charts that we have. All right. So, a couple questions that just came in. We don't comment on any rumors of, ridiculous rumors of future product, especially because if you think about it, those people know absolutely nothing. They're guessing and just trying to rile up the market. Is there any hope in the future for faster exposure bracketing and or allowing 2-stop increments on the S5 Mark II? This is something that I have asked the engineers about, but honestly, I haven't followed up enough on that. So it's a good reminder. I will check in about seeing can the focus bracketing or the exposure bracketing have greater distance between the individual shots. I see a value in it. I just have to see if it's something that they can do in the camera. John says, when can we expect G9 Mark II user manual will be available? We'll answer so many questions such as AF point scope, etc. That's a good question. User manuals typically are available right around the time of the release of the camera. So I would imagine that they're going to be available within the next couple of weeks, since the camera, at least here in the United States, is going to be supposed to be shipping around mid-November. Assuming everything works fine transit-wise, the world is a weird place. So, Jay Ford says, my S5IIX powers down and turns off even when plugged in using the proper plug-in cable. All I was doing was stills in the studio. Alright. That's kind of a good segue to something, the other part of this stream that I want to talk about, which is the high-resolution shot mode. So, let me set this up here. If you're going to be in the studio and you're doing, you've got the camera plugged in and all that stuff, check your power saving options, Jay Ford. By default, the camera's going to come in with sleep mode, the viewfinder setup here, and then power saving LVF. Just go through and make sure if you're going to be running uninterrupted power and you're going to be using the camera all day, you can turn all of this stuff off if you want. They are on by default though, so it can cause, like, hey, if it's set to like 5 minutes and it happens to be that it turns off even when you're plugged in, it's still going to try to go to a sleep mode even when you're plugged in. So hopefully that helps. So the other major update that came with this firmware update is the AF point scope functionality on this camera. So, unlike last week, I'm actually going to talk about it because, as someone pointed out last week, because the G9 Mark II has it, I just completely missed it in the menus. It shows you how often I use the feature. AF point scope is added to the S5 Mark II and the Mark IIX. It is in the G9 Mark II by default, so this is going to be the same settings, same way that it works. So AF point scope settings, you have a couple of tools here with it. AF point time is long, medium, and short. This is just how long that window, picture-in-picture, stays up on the screen. And then the display is whether or not you want it as picture-in-picture or you want it the full frame itself. Water's a good thing. So yeah, you have the choices here to set that up. But then you also have AF point scope settings. You have the ability to keep the enlarge. So this means that when you press the FN button that you assign to AF point scope, you can have it either act as a toggle or as a press and release. By default, it is set as press and release, so that means that if you want to have the AF point scope enabled, you have to press and hold the button that you've assigned to it. When you release that button, it goes back to the normal screen. Toggle, obviously, as it says, it's toggle. You've got that ability. Then picture-in-picture display, this is, again, it's how you want it to look. Do you want it to be full, or do you want it to be in picture-to-picture? Typically, I use picture-to-picture for AF point scope. To me, it just makes a little more sense. Now, to use AF point scope, you're going to program this to one of your function buttons. It isn't a programmed function button by default. So for this, I'm going to go through the menus because I should have done this beforehand, but I forgot what page AF point scope is on for all these options because we have so many options available. So here it is. It's called SCP in the menus here. If you come from an older camera like the G9, we had SCP was one of the default function buttons on there. It's actually a default function button for one of the front FN buttons by the grip. Here, SCP, you just set it, and it's going to be assigned to that function button. So now when you press it and you hold it, in my case, you get this punch-in. You do have the ability to change the magnification of that point just by rotating the rear dial, just like you would with manual focus assist. So you can move this however you want. Now, what's great about this particular mode is that, especially if you're in continuous autofocus does not give you access to autofocus pinpoint, which some macro photographers that I've worked with really like the pinpoint function for this because it allows you to get a really fine-tuned focus point. This lets you use it in any of the modes that you're in. So even if I'm in, say, zone horizontal, I can hit point scope and it's going to use the middle of wherever my system is. So little awkward if you're doing like zones like this because it's going to go right into the middle of the frame, but you have access to be able to punch in and use this. It is most commonly useful when you're going to be in one of the area modes, so one area or one area plus. This way you can move that point around, and then when I'm ready to shoot, I can just hit this, and there we go. Now I can press the focus button. I know where it's at. It's in AFC at that point. When I'm back out, I'm in AF continuous, good to go. So you do have that function now, works great, especially for ultra long telephoto lenses. It's a real solid choice. Let's see here. I just saw a whole bunch of questions or comments come in here. Just remember, if you have a question, make sure to tag at Lumix USA just so I can see it. I did happen to see these questions come through here. Let's see here. Jay Ford says the battery appears to drain, I think, according to the battery symbol. Then at that point, double check, Jay Ford, double check and make sure that if you're powering the camera over USB, make sure that device is saying that it outputs 9 volt 3 amp. 9 volt 3 amp is the required power output from the device to go into the camera for it to charge and operate at the same time. If it is under 9 volt 3 amp, it is trickle charging the battery, but while you are using the camera, you are going to be overrunning what the USB power delivery is going to be at that point. So you will run the battery down. It'll just be an extended period of time versus a regular battery. If it doesn't seem to have any effect on it, and you'd never get a warning on the screen that says like, hey, turn the camera off to charge, then at that point, check the power source that you're using, because it may not actually be providing power to the camera. You will get a symbol on the battery icon that has a little like kind of looks like a 2-prong plug that tells you that you are getting power through that. Is there a place where we can request firmware updates? I have 2 wishes: focus point magnification or confirmation. For example, the AYA automatically, manual attribute lenses names to third-party lenses. I collect old lenses and want to name them in the EXIFs. So Weber, your point 2 is actually in the cameras. You do have that already with manual lenses in our cameras. And I think point 1 that you're referencing does exist as well. How can I show this? Let me take a picture here. All right. Hopefully my switch doesn't break like it's been doing the last couple. Hey, it didn't. So we do have confirmation and point magnification. It is an option in the menu. So what you would do is go to the playback menu. It's just not enabled by default. Do magnify from AF point. If you use face and eye detection, if you use any subject detection, things like that, it's going to put the box on the playback screen like you saw. And then you're able to just punch in and you can view that point. So I think that's what you were asking for. If it's not, just let me know in the chat. That was the closest thing I could think of to what you're saying. As far as the names for the lenses in EXIF data, I have to double check that one. I believe it does. I don't shoot with enough adapted lenses to know that one confidently. Let's see here. My S5IIX seems to have a LED in the front of the camera top right. Could we have an update adding tally lamp light this function LED? That LED that is there is the AF assist lamp. It doesn't have the same functionality that a tally lamp would. It's not designed for that. It's a projection light. So even if it could be toggled as a tally lamp, you would not want it because it's actually going to project a red hue on whatever is you're filming. So cool idea, but really not a good idea because AF assist lamps are going to be visible in what you're filming. And then, all right, last question before we jump into high resolution shot mode. Will the subject detection modes of the G9 Mark II come to the S5 Mark II, and I assume or Mark IIX? At this point, I cannot confirm or deny if those modes are going to be able to come to the S5 Mark II or the Mark IIX. I would love to see them come to the camera, but I honestly don't know. The processor that's used in the G9 Mark II is a derivative of what the S5 Mark II and the Mark IIX L² engine is, so there are some inherent differences there. There are also some differences when you start looking at power consumption, at sensor readout speeds, at just the way everything's programmed. So at this point, it is too early for me to be able to say, yes, it can, or no, it can't. I know you want to hear more than that. I wish I had a better answer for you. That's just kind of where it's at right now. So let's talk about high-resolution shot mode. On the S5 Mark II, we have had high-resolution shot in this camera for quite some time. In fact, actually, we've had high-resolution shot modes available in a number of our cameras since the original G9. That was the camera that launched high-resolution shot mode in our system. With our high-resolution shot mode, the way this system works is if you are using the tripod-based mode, which is anything that is not explicitly stating high-res, like handheld high-res. These modes use 8 images captured with a shift in where the frame is. It's using the stabilization system to then compile those images, those 8 images, into a 4 times resolution increase with the ability to mask out motion in the frame and intelligently up-res areas that may have to take a lower part of the resolution to cancel out motion. This has been something that we've been doing for quite some time now, and we've gotten pretty damn good at it. So we have Mode 1 and Mode 2. We've talked about these before. Mode 1 means that you don't want any motion blur processing being done. You want the effect of the blur being carried through, which means there is a higher possibility of running into situations where you see multiples of a subject or you see artifacts. That's just what a high-resolution shot is that it's multiple images, and if something moves, you could have a checkered pattern or some other issues there. Mode 2 removes those artifacts by taking the images and actually intelligently moving the pixels around so that they align perfectly. This is also how it handles things like rushing water, planes flying through the air, cars driving on the street for the most part, people walking in the frame for the most part, and basically cancels them out so that you get a higher resolution image and you get to still have the proper looking effect for people that were moving through the frame. If they were walking, if a car's driving really fast and it's going really fast, even with mode 2, you could still run into some challenges with it. Although from my testing with the S5 Mark IIX, it's pretty damn impressive. But the improvements that we've added come down to what you can use with this. So up until this firmware update, you were limited to 1 second for handheld, or for the high resolution shot mode, the general mode. Now after the firmware, you can do out to 8-second exposures. So that means that you can do 8-second exposures to combine in. Obviously, 8 seconds is a long amount of time, which means that there's a higher probability of motion being in the frame, so you're going to want to make sure mode 2 is turned on. Or if you're doing still life and you know that absolutely nothing moves, you can leave mode 1 off and just prioritize getting as high of a resolution image as you possibly can. So the other big thing that was added here is the handheld option for these two cameras. Now, these are, to my knowledge, the first and only full-frame cameras in the market that do a high-resolution shot mode handheld, and we are still one of the onlys, if not the only, that actually processes these images in camera and kicks out the high-res image for you right in the camera. You don't need to use any kind of external software that adds a whole bunch of extra setup here. So, when you turn handheld high-resolution shot on, what this changes is that the S5 Mark II, the Mark IIX, the G9 Mark II, and the G1 or the GH6. Those are the 4 cameras that can do handheld high-res. These cameras now take 16 images, so you're doubling the amount of images. These images are then taken, you're still only getting a 4 times resolution bump, but you are giving it more information to counteract movement that you have with the camera. So as I move the camera, it's going to counteract that motion. This means that you're going to be able to take advantage of not needing to have a tripod. The shutter speeds can be dropped down to 1 second exposures if you are that good at hand holding. So just kind of keep that in mind. But it really opens up that flexibility of what you can do with high resolution shot modes. So to show this, I was in New York City recently and had the firmware ready to go. These are handheld shots from the S5 Mark IIX shooting just walking throughout the street. So in case, make sure that I'm actually in the window for Lightroom here. So these are at 1/640th of a second, f2.8, ISO 160, just because I was primarily doing street photography, and these are with the 85mm. So, if I go to the comparative view, we're going to look at, I have the high resolution shot, which is 12,000 by 8,000 pixels, versus the 6,000 by 4,000, the standard resolution image. So here, we're going to punch in and take a look at what we get resolution-wise. So you'll see here that at 100% on the full 96 megapixel image that you see here, obviously you're getting a much larger image out of the camera. But if I take the standard 100 megapixel or the standard 24 megapixel and I bump that into 200% so that we're about equivalent in the amount of information here, you'll see, hopefully the compression works okay on YouTube to see this. I'll let it settle for a second. Hopefully what you'll see here is how much more detail and separation you get in the fine details between these two images, especially in the bricks here. So you actually see more information. As we go up a little bit further into, say, the window here, now again, these are the same exposures. So these are 6/40th of a second, f2.8 at ISO 160. You'll see that even at ISO 160, high resolution shot mode is going to give you even cleaner looking images. It's going to give you less noise because the camera is recording color and information pixels where noise pixels had originally been created. But even when you look up in here in the kind of center part of this frame above this window, how much more detail you're actually getting in the brickwork here versus the standard one that's right over here. So you get a lot of control on what you can actually create without the need of a tripod. So if we take a look at another image here, again, kind of the same thing, just walking. And what was important about these is that these are literally just taking the camera, pointing, clicking the shutter button, making sure delay is off for the shutter, clicking the shutter button, letting it take those images, and then taking it down and continuing my walk. So no interruption into my daily shooting. And what's nice is that this system, if we're looking back at the menu, I have the ability to also have it just store out a standard 24 megapixel full resolution image from that file. I don't have to change anything about that. I get the entire normal shot with all the high res. So I will always get a good image out of it. Someone had asked before about the picture size differences here. We do have the option to do a 48 megapixel, so only a 2 times resolution increase. The XL is going to give you full 96. The large image is 48, but these are for the JPEG images only. The raw images are always going to be at 96 megapixel. I just saw a couple of questions coming in here that I want to make sure I answer before we continue with the high res. Do you think we'll have HDR photo in camera like phones are doing? I mean, if you want to point and shoot, the point and shoots will most likely possibly go down that route. I mean, there have been HDR modes in cameras for a while, where it takes like 3 shots and then conforms it. But yeah, let's see here. Were you able to see the cause of lighten up and darken up on the screen while pressing half shutter? I don't see that in my camera. So like I'm doing it right now. If I stop the lens down, same thing. And I have constant preview enabled. So I have to look a little further into that one. Does DR boost off have enough dynamic range for full vlog when the GH5 Mark II had vlog L? Well, yeah, because vlog logarithmic profiles are not bound by a very specific, I mean, they are bound by a dynamic range that they're designed for, but GH5 Mark II was designed for what that sensor was designed to be able to do on the vlog curve. GH6 is designed for what that can do. G9 Mark II is designed for what it can take advantage of. And vlog is designed to be able to take the look that you get from, say, a Vericam, an S1H, and a G9 Mark II, and you're able to match them across the board. So, yeah. Just joined. Does the adapted lenses with the new DJI LuMix update EF class with SIG MC21 to L mount, does AF work with speed booster lenses and MST? Chris, so I did address that earlier, but yes, you do need the gimbal for it to work. And no, I have not been able to get the EF class on the MC21 to work. However, I will put a big caveat on the MC21 is that I've only been able to test it with an APS-C EF lens, not from Sigma. And in that case, it didn't work, and there is zero guarantee that anything outside of Sigma's EF lenses are designed to work on the MC21. I would have to double check, and I don't have a speed booster. And I see Matt's here, so thank you, Matt, for jumping in there. I have an S5IIX. I understand what you're asking about, but I don't have any update for you there. The new firmware for the GH6 allows DJI LiDAR to work together, but can it work without the RSC Pro gimbal? And does the BGH1 have the same integration? It does require the gimbal. It does require the RS3 Pro gimbal to have the LiDAR system work. The BGH1 does not have the same integration, but the BS1H does have the integration. Will high-res mode work with super zooms like the Sigma 150 to 600? I'm glad you asked that question. Yes, it does. It does work because I have tested it with the 60 to 600 that I have back there. I just don't have any of the images loaded up here ready to go. Handheld high-res is going to be much harder because you are going to be moving the frame a lot more than you would on the tripod. And you may have higher instances of the high resolution shot failing when you're doing ultra telephoto because of how much the frame can move. So you just kind of have to think about that just a little bit with how the system kind of works, right? You can only ever account for so much motion when you're doing high resolution shot modes because you still have to have the pixels within a certain range. It's the same as if you're taking multiple frames, loading them into Photoshop, and trying to create a super resolution image that way. They can work. They don't always work. But I have done it. I've done supermoon photos with the 150 or the 60 to 600 on the S5 Mark II, and that was during tripod high-res mode with motion 2, and it still came out. So, I really want a cine body from Lumix. Is there an EVA one still worth picking up? I want an all-in-one body with XLRs and ND plus the form factor. I don't want the EVA one. Goodbye. EVA 1 is definitely still, I would say, a workhorse of a camera. I know a few people that still actually kind of swear by them, but I can't necessarily say if it's going to be great for you, Chris. It is a little bit older, image-wise, I believe, and maybe Matt, correct me if I'm wrong. I think the EVA 1 was closer to the GH4 era as far as the overall system and performance goes. But it's a cinema design camera, so it's got a lot of the extra stuff that cinema-oriented chassis would look for. Still could be a great camera. But yeah, as far as if we're going to do anything along those lines, those are the areas where we don't have the ability to comment. Even if we did know, we wouldn't be able to tell you. So yeah, the last kind of thing really to kind of talk about as far as the firmware updates go is one that I actually purposely wanted to hold off till the end to talk about a little bit here. And that is actually it's the GH5 era. So EVA 1, GH5 era. So if you've used GH5, you're going to be good there. Thank you, Matt. So with the GH5 Mark II, which is actually a good segue that we're talking about the GH. The GH5 Mark II also did get an additional update as far as improvements. And I want to bring this up because I've had a couple people... I want to make sure that it's at least brought up so that those people out there that want to shoot in the CineD2 profile on the GH5 Mark II can make sure that you download this firmware. The GH5 Mark II's 1.3 firmware also did add an improved color reproduction for hue continuity on the okay, I think my internet is cutting out because we have a wicked lightning storm running through. So I just gotta, sorry everybody, I just gotta notice here if it gets choppy for a second. So yes, if you've got a GH5 Mark II, make sure that you get that firmware downloaded if you're someone who prioritizes CineD2. There are always improvements being done to image quality, to the picture profiles, to the way the systems work, to even just down to reliability in the functionality. Charbeck says you need Starlink. Hell no, I don't need Starlink. I have 5 gigabit Google Fiber. And this is a particularly wicked bad storm that's happening right now, and Starlink wouldn't even work at that point. So, yeah. So, yeah. Make sure to get the firmware update downloaded, especially if you're in a GH5 Mark II. The firmware update is not just the LiDAR edition, and that's true for all the firmware updates. Even if you're not going to utilize something that is, say, maybe the headline feature of the firmware update, it's still a good practice to get into downloading, you know, the firmware updates and making sure that the camera that you're working with is getting the best possible performance that it can. What I'm going to try to do now, if y'all can bear with me for a few seconds, is some people had asked if I could demonstrate the LiDAR focusing performance from the GH6. So off camera, I am trying to rig this up with my HDMI cable so that I can show y'all how the LiDAR focusing system works on the GH6. Just got to give me a second. I wasn't planning on doing it, so I got to move a couple of things around and get this all kind of together for you. So bear with me for a second. What did they say on SNL years ago? Talks amongst yourselves. All right. So we got this set up. I believe I've got this rigged up right. Gimbal's got power. We are set up here. Okay. Nope. Don't want to. Nope. There we go. Okay. Give me 1 second, y'all. Get this in here. All right. Do we have video out? Let me do this. Nope, that's my face camera. Let's do this. We do! Awesome! Cool! All right. It's working. So, right now, what I have this thing set up for is... Let me do this. Turn this one off for now. Okay. So, there's going to be some audio delay because I don't have my switch set up with the microphone system, so sorry, y'all. So this is the setup for my GH6 running the LiDAR system that I've got here. So let's turn here a little bit. What you see now is what you're going to be able to do with the LiDAR system for this. So we've got it set up. When I go up into this, you'll see that it's jumping in and you're getting a very fast, snappy focus. So particularly, look back here. This is the region to look at to see where the difference is. There you go. Now, I have this set up. This is that kind of challenging part with the way this system works, is that I have to think at this distance. If I look at the lens and I cover the lens, I'm not actually covering where the LiDAR finder is picking up its distance information because it's about that different from the lens. I guess I'll do it that way. It's about that much higher than the lens. So, because I can go into the gimbal and I can change this to flexible spot now, I know that I can just put this up and I can be changing the distance here. The challenge with this difference as well here is that because of how close I am, I can get this closer to where the lens isn't really, the lens is focusing about right here. So it's a little challenging making sure that you're in the right spot for it. But as you can see, it's a very fast focus. So as I move in and out, it's actually kind of staying with me. So, you get that difference in the way the system works. So, hopefully that worked. That was a pretty, not my favorite way of having to demonstrate that. But that was this whole setup just working there for you. So, I saw a couple of other questions come through here. Where do we go? Jeff says, do you know any apps that could read or display full metadata, especially focal length and photo style on Mac or Windows? For video, or if it's for video, I use... What's the program I use? I think the program I use is called Media Info. Is the one that I use on Windows. I know that it's available on PC as well. Or on Mac as well. Media Info is the one that I work with. Let's see here. Thanks for answering, Matt. Can you point to any example? Okay, that's a different part of what I'm looking at. How does LiDAR work with people wearing glasses or mirrors? LiDAR can be tripped up. That's one of the things to remember. Reflective surfaces like that, you can trip up things like LiDAR. As far as its performance and how it compares to things like G9 Mark II or to S5 Mark II, Mark IIX, hands down, our PDAF array and system is for 99% of the use cases that you're going to work with, the built-in phase hybrid system is better than the LiDAR system. The LiDAR system, compared to older style systems or to very challenging scenarios in ultra low light, where all PDAF systems kind of run into some problems, that's where the LiDAR system can work well. Core thing to remember, the LiDAR system has no indication of where your subject's eyes are, where your subject's, like where exactly in the box that it can put on a face, where you want it to actually focus. So if you're shooting in shallow depth of field and you're trying to get, this much in focus, just the eyes, LiDAR is going to miss that. The built-in systems are going to work way better in that case because they have the processing for subject and point validation for where it wants the focus system to work. So just kind of keep that in mind with it. But yeah, that kind of covers all the firmware updates for today. Hopefully, y'all got something out of it, that you, kind of got questions answered. You got the stuff that you kind of wanted to hear about the firmware updates. If there are things that I did not cover that you want to hear more in depth on, let us know in the chat. And we're super happy to carry these conversations into next week's stream if you want as well. Yeah, other than that, thank you all for tuning in, asking some amazing questions, providing some awesome feedback. If you want to see more like this particular stream, let us know in the comments after the video is posted. If there are things that you want to learn more about, like I kind of said before, leave those in the comments after this video. The comments help us with the algorithm to get these videos out to more people. Other than that, we will be back next Thursday at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. Just continuing these conversations as we get closer to the G9 Mark II actually being shipping at least in the US. If you like the video, give us a like, subscribe if you're not already. Share the video to people that you think may be interested in learning from the source about the information on this firmware update. Hopefully we can cut through some of the confusing information that's being spread by people who have never even put their hands on these cameras before. And other than that, look forward to talking to you all next week. I hope you have an awesome rest of your day, an awesome rest of your weekend, and you can always follow up with these videos later as they get published back on the stream right when we're done. So yeah, with that, peace out, everybody. Later.